Kaufman. I am a therapist, a divorce coach, parent educator, and a trained mediator. And I have a book and an online course and group coaching program, all helping people navigate divorce so that it isn't as tough as I had it.
That's a good mission. So I'm a divorce coach as well. My name is Chloe. I'm based in London. And my job is really to help people to divorce without going to war. So I help those who have an ambition to divorce amicably, not because they want to be best friends with their ex, but because they want to make things as smooth and as cheap and as painless as possible. And so I help them to divorce with less conflict so that they can move on with their lives faster ultimately. And I think both of us, Jill, in our jobs get exposed to quite a lot of misconceptions that people have about what divorce is or how it pans out. And, you know, especially me, I have a lot of people, well, not especially, I don't know about you, but I have a lot of people who come to me at the very early stages of the divorce process. And so they don't have the information. They have all these fears. And sometimes they're very much hesitating to proceed because of those fears. And some of them are unfounded. So what we want to do today is address those. Did you have anything? Did you have that experience as well?
Yes, I mean, the people who come to me early, I am thankful for because they haven't made the mistakes that they could make
Absolutely.
later on. But yeah, they a lot of people don't understand the process and don't really know how to navigate it and start it all. So yeah, there's a lot of myths out
Yeah.
there. So yeah.
So I think maybe we start with the biggest one, which is I think the one that I find holds a lot of people off as well, is this fear that divorce is always the way it's portrayed in movies, you know, Kramer versus Kramer kind of thing, where it becomes this courtroom drama that lasts years, empties your bank account, destroys everything in its wake. And I think that's how the media portray things, and probably how divorce was, you know, a few decades ago. But there has been a lot of progress, thankfully, and a lot of focus on amicable resolutions. And so actually nowadays there are a lot of different options that prevent or that help you avoid those kind of expensive, drawn out legal battles. Is that one that you see a lot too?
Yeah, so I think that that's still possible, right?
Oh, it
Like
still
it's
happens,
very
unfortunately.
possible to get into a long, drawn out legal battle, but it's not the norm. And 95% of divorces are settled out
Yeah,
of court.
yeah.
And so most people don't settle their, go to trial and settle it that way. So, and like you said, there's so many options now that people aren't aware of that will keep you out of court. And unfortunately, a lot of attorneys, a lot of people start working with an attorney and think that's the way you need to, start your divorce process. And a lot of attorneys are much more bent towards, conflict
Yeah.
and, increasing the conflict. And they don't even realize it because they don't think about the other party and how they're going to receive, the communication. And so that's where you can get into trouble. But even if you have some kind of high conflict, you can change course and decrease the conflict and lower it and settle out of court. So
Yep.
people think like, they have to file, with the court when they start the process. That's not true in most places. I guess there are some places where you have to be separated for a certain amount of time. So
Mhm.
you do have to
I think in
file with the
Canada
court,
you do, yeah.
and some states too.
Okay.
But, most places you don't even have to file with the court. You don't file until you have an agreement, and then you file as an
Yeah.
uncontested divorce. So, there's a lot for people to understand and know that before they start on this process to help them with that.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I think there's been more and more awareness around family mediation, which is great because it's a really, really good option. But in the UK, we've also got collaborative law, which I think you've got in the States as well, which is another form of dispute resolution that isn't court-based, which involves each of the people in the couple having their own lawyer, a specific lawyer who's trained in collaborative law, and they literally just all sit down at a table and have a big powwow and try and hash it out. So that's an option as well.
Yes, and the only problem with that is you are still communicating with your lawyers, and
Yes.
that's expensive.
Yeah.
And some cases need that because they can't communicate with each other, but there are ways to mediate without your attorneys present,
Yeah.
um, and then use your attorneys kind of as a
Yeah.
consultant. So there's,
Yeah.
there's a lot of nuance there, and it depends on your situation, what's best for you.
For sure. And I think that's again where the value comes out of speaking to a divorce coach early, is that you get to understand those options, think through which one's the right one for you based on your conflict style, your appetite, your spouse's conflict style and appetite for conflict, what the stakes are as well, because you're going to spend according to how much you've got to get. If we're talking a fairly small, number of assets, you're not going to want to spend, thousands and thousands on lawyers. So all of that needs to be taken into consideration. But the point is that it isn't necessarily court. And actually, in the vast majority of cases, it isn't a court battle.
Right.
And thinking of it as there's a winner and a loser, and it becomes, a little bit like when you see those courtroom dramas on TV. It's a very it's a very fake view of what it looks like in practice, because it really isn't about winning or losing. And a lot of the work that I do with my clients is helping them to think through what victory looks like to them. And it's not in opposition to the other person. It's what do they want to get out of this? How do they want to feel, and how do they want to be equipped at the end of the process? And so defining that own version of what good looks like allows you then to achieve those objectives. And that's a lot more rewarding than going to court and everybody feeling like they've been, given an arrangement that doesn't really even suit anyone.
Right. And when you go to court, you're listening to what a judge
Yeah.
says, and the judge is making the decision as opposed to settling out of
Yeah.
court where you're making the decision.
Yeah.
And that's a huge difference because the judge doesn't really focus on your children or know your family, and it's the worst person to make a decision
Absolutely.
for
And then
your
a
family.
lot of the time they don't even have that much time. People think it's going to be, they're going to have time to tell their whole story and share their version of the facts. And it's a quick process. The judges see, 10, 15 people or couples a day. They don't have time to get into the detail of it all. But I think
Right.
for me, the biggest value out of not going down, the more litigious approach is really to try that you manage to preserve a little bit of the relationship to be able to co-parent properly afterwards. If there's children involved, you're going to have a million other decisions to make throughout the life of your children. And if you don't know how to speak to each other, you're not going to go to a judge every time you disagree about something.
Right.
So it's also that kind of long-term investment in the relationship,
Right.
and the amount of damage you cause on the way as well.
Exactly. And the lawyers do not take that into consideration.
No.
I remember my attorney she made me sign something saying that she didn't recommend me take the deal that I had agreed to with my
Right.
ex because she thought I could get more, but more isn't worth the emotional toll on me or our children or anybody.
Exactly.
So
Right.
yeah, it's really you have to be objective and be able to really look at it and say what is worth it and
Yeah.
what can I live with. And you can't do that by yourself. Most people can't do that by yourself. You
Yeah.
need somebody to help you, and like friends and family are not really
No.
objective. So like you need some objective person to kind of navigate this with you and help you figure it out. I would have just loved that when I was going through my divorce.
I mean, I now in hindsight, I wonder why nobody ever told me about mediation. We had lawyers who were telling us both to just not speak to each other and only communicate through them.
That's what they say. That's what they say. And that's the worst thing. And I did you didn't do
I
mediation?
wasn't even told about mediation.
Oh, yeah, I did mediation, but it was after we had already spent so much money. And, it was like, yeah, we got it done in mediation, but we should have done that from the beginning.
Yeah. So the good thing is, I mean, I know in the UK and I think in the States as well, there really is a push towards out of court dispute resolution. And now in the UK, actually, people have to prove that they have explored those options, and they have to justify why they didn't go down that route if they dismissed it. So there is definitely a bit more emphasis on that. And if anything, it forces that consideration of those options.
Right.
It may not be, it may be that you're in a situation where it just doesn't work for you and it can't happen. But as we were saying, it's a very small percentage of cases.
Right.
And even in a high conflict case, it's always better for everybody to get things done, privately, faster, cheaper, and, just with less, less stress and angst.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. No, I can't stress that enough. But people get so emotionally triggered,
Hmm.
when their ex, soon to be ex, says something or does something.
Yeah.
And, that gets you just caught up in it, and you're not thinking with your prefrontal
Yeah.
cortex. You're thinking with your like,
Your amygdala.
yeah, amygdala. Exactly. So you just do crazy things, just like, when you're not thinking clearly.
And I think that's why people tend to go straight to a lawyer as well. It's because they feel they need protection. There's this idea that your lawyer is going to be kind of your front man or front woman who's going to, defend you. But again, it isn't a war. So if you don't think of it in that way, if you think about somebody who can actually help you find arrangements, then it's a very different approach, and it's a different set of professionals that you tend to engage with.
Exactly. And if anybody's here, we'd love questions,
Yes,
because we would love to answer your questions. If you have any, put it in the comments, right,
absolutely.
Chloe?
Yeah, yeah. We'll see them pop up in the comments, but
Awesome.
don't hesitate. This is meant to be interactive.
Yeah.
The second one that we had, when we were preparing for this, we were talking about, there's so many myths about divorce, but the second one we had was really this fear that was usually one of the big things that people get concerned about is, I'm going to hurt my children, and divorce in itself is going to be so bad for my kids, and it's going to destroy them, and they're not going to be able to have proper relationships later on, etc. And what's interesting is if you look at research, I think dating back to the 80s, what they found is that actually it isn't the divorce in itself that hurts the kids. It's seeing the conflict. So back to our first point and the value of getting things done out of court. The more conflict the children witness, the more upset they get because they are stuck in the middle and they see two people they love fighting it out. So I think that's another big one that we wanted to talk about.
Yeah. And I get people say this all the time to me. They're like, well, we don't fight in front of our kids. Like, they don't know that we're not, getting along. I'm like, you're living in the same house. They see everything. They feel what's going on between you two. If it's not a close relationship, and even if there's not huge fighting, that's the role model you're giving your children for a
Yeah,
relationship, and that's not usually good for kids.
that's
And
true.
so, it's really, really important that you not avoid divorce because of the
Hmm.
kids, because the kids benefit from two happy
Yeah.
parents. And I know that's controversial to some people, because they're like, you should do everything in your power to make your marriage work. And I agree. I do not recommend divorce for anybody if you cannot get divorced. However, if you're not happy, you're not going to be a good
Yeah.
parent. So you really have to be, um, aware that it's affecting your kids, even if there's not out and out fighting.
And you're also modeling, a way of life. I mean, I had a client the other day who was telling me how, she was describing her marriage as, he puts her down, all the things that were happening in her that were really hurtful to her. And she says, but I don't know if I should leave him. And so I asked her, if your daughter was telling you that that was what her marriage was like, what would you tell her? And it's very, and she's like, oh, I would tell her to leave him. And so
Right.
we have that perspective. So it's also, you don't want to be teaching your kids that it's okay to be in a relationship where the other person belittles you, or where you're just not happy together, or where you can't get along. That's not what you want for them
Right.
either. And so in showing them that actually this, you know better than to expose them to that, and that you have a sense of self-worth, that you yourself deserve more than that as well. That's also a really positive message to your kids. Pursue your dreams, know that you deserve better, don't settle. And so I think that's something to consider as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and I always tell this story. So my parents were married over 50 years until my dad passed away. It was a miserable marriage. I had always wanted them to divorce, but it was easier that they were together for me, whatever. Um, my kids, so I married my kid's father when I was 25,
Oh,
a little
young.
too young.
Yeah.
We were only dating 10 months. Not what I would recommend, like, that was, looking back now at my age, that was not smart. So my oldest now is 30. My middle one is 28. Both of them, my middle one has been with their partner for 8 years. My oldest one is living with his girlfriend for probably 4 years. Neither of them are engaged to be married, and they're more careful about it. And I do think, my oldest at least will be married. My youngest is only 24, so he's not at that stage yet. But my 30-year-old will get married to this wonderful woman. They have a wonderful relationship, but they're not going to rush
Yeah.
into it, and they're going to make sure that they're the right people for each other. And that's something that you're also teaching your kids
Yeah.
when you go through this, that this is an important
Yeah.
decision.
Yeah.
Don't make it too quickly. And
Yeah.
I
Good
didn't
point.
learn that from my parents.
But I mean, whether you're staying married or divorcing, for the kids to witness their parents tearing each other apart, not treating each other nicely, feeling unhappy, whether they see them crying or any of it, it's very distressing to them, and that's exactly what you're trying to avoid. And actually, if you can get divorced in a civil way, and I use civil as opposed to amicable because people think amicable means you're best friends and you're all singing kumbaya, right? This is just in a way that has your kids at the center of your considerations, where you can agree to disagree but to still behave like normal human beings and not tear each other apart. That's where you're going to be able to protect your children. Staying in an unhappy marriage doesn't protect them. It's really focusing on how you get divorced, how you maintain that relationship. Even with somebody who's not your favorite person in the world, you still do have that shared common interest, which is your children's well-being.
And I always tell people that your relationship changes when you go from being married to going through divorce and eventually divorce. You don't have to agree on everything. You don't have to talk to them about things. You don't have to care about the way each other feels. It's a totally different relationship. And me and my ex now get along very well. And, after a high conflict divorce, and it's because we don't need to, interact the same way that we
Yeah.
used to. So it's really, you have to change that mindset of, really caring what they say and really getting, into a lot of details and other things that, other than the kids, you really don't need to get into
Yeah.
anything with them if that's not where you guys get along.
Yeah.
So it's a much different kind of relationship once you're going through
You're
divorce.
right. You're right. And I think that's part of the transition, because there's of course like the admin and the legal process of divorce, but then there's the psychological one, which is one that usually takes a bit longer. And learning little by little to disassociate yourself from the other person. You're no longer their wife, their husband. You're your own person, rediscovering who that person is, and learning to not care what they do, what they think, and that can be quite hard for people to do. And I find a lot of my clients in that post-divorce phase, that's what they're still struggling with. The paperwork's done.
Right.
It's learning to psychologically let go.
Right. And that's so important to do, because then you can really start the grieving process and
Yeah.
moving forward. Yeah.
So actually, that was one of the other myths we mentioned, was that sense of emotional justice, where people think that in a divorce, especially if it's litigated, they're going to get this opportunity of their day in court, and finally somebody is going to see that their ex is an asshole and that they misbehaved and take their side. And that, I think, is something that's often very disappointing for people who actually pursue the legal route, because they think that they're going to get that satisfaction. And just like we were saying earlier, the judge doesn't really know you, doesn't care that much about who you are,
Right.
has seen 15 other people that day. They're not interested whether your ex is being nasty to you or if they sent you a snotty message yesterday. That's not the forum for that emotional justice. And that healing needs to happen, but it's not part of the legal process. And so I think it's important for people to understand that big courtroom moment of the judge saying, you were horrible to them and you shouldn't have. It doesn't happen.
No,
But a
no.
lot of people hold on to that dream because they do want that justice.
Yeah. No, I think n- people think they're going to get to court or get to the end of their divorce and they're going to be like, I won. And it's not, nobody's going to win. It's not something you win. You're going to have to give up things that you may not want to give up. But in the end, most people turn out okay.
Yeah.
Most people figure it out and get, if you really know what's important to you, like Chloe, you were talking about figuring out like what your priorities
Mhm.
are and like what you should fight for, that those kinds of things. If you know that, it's so much easier to get to a solution that you're happy with,
Yeah.
because then you can give up those other things. So,
Yeah.
you may not win, but you will most likely get what's most important to you.
Exactly. Yeah, I think, to be honest, a good settlement, everybody comes out a little bit feeling like, oof, I've had to give stuff up. But that's the point. I mean, by definition, you're splitting things up. You're
Yeah,
splitting up a couple, but you're
yeah,
splitting up time with your children. You're splitting up assets. No one's going to get the whole lot. And so,
exactly.
you have to just accept that as long as you're coming out of it with what you need and what you wanted, that's what matters, and that's what that victory looks like. But
Exactly.
I think that's always a bit confusing, because those emotions that come into it, especially if there's been, foul play by one of the two partners, or abuse or anything like that, where there is that sense that I want somebody official, impartial, to recognize that they misbehaved, and
Yeah.
completely relate to that feeling. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen in a court of
Yeah.
law. So that's
And
yeah,
most places in the States, I don't know in the UK, they don't care if one spouse cheats on the other. It's
same
a
here.
no fault. But there are a few states that still, it still affects the settlement. But
Does
yes, there
it?
are. But most of the states, it doesn't affect the settlement. So,
In the UK, it doesn't at all. So any ground for divorce, I mean, even if there's abuse, it might have an impact on in terms of the child arrangements, but it wouldn't have an impact on the financial assets or anything like that.
yeah. No, I mean it's something that that's another myth, like if they cheated, my mother always thought that, because I think it was like that, years
It
and
was for
years
a
ago.
while, yeah.
Yeah, and but if somebody cheats, it usually doesn't
Yeah.
affect anything. So,
And the other big one that I hear a lot is that, especially coming from women, and I'm stereotyping, but that is what I'm seeing in practice, is this fear that their ex is going to take everything because it's his, or because they were the money earner, or whatever it might be. And so this fear that I'm going to be left literally like living under a bridge with two suitcases.
right.
And that is, again, what we see in movies, but
Yes.
it doesn't happen legally. And certainly here in the UK, you can't get a financial order splitting the assets that is not balanced.
Right.
A court has to sign off that agreement, and
Right.
they're going to check that the basic needs of both parties are met, that it's not, imbalanced or in favor of one of the two. That's going to get checked. So it can't happen. You're going to be left with less than when you were with them, but both people lose. But you're not going to be left, homeless when the other person gets to keep the mansion.
Yeah, the only issue is when there are hiding of assets. If
Ah, that's true.
somebody's hiding income or assets, and that can result in something that's not fair. However, there are techniques that we have
Yeah.
as divorce coaches to find hidden assets and income, and we have professionals that are, that's all they do, and so there are things that you can do. So even in those circumstances, there's most likely you're going to everything's going to work out okay.
Yeah, and when you look at the stats, actually, it's quite sad, because what they see is that in terms of the financial means of each party after divorce, the financial means of men usually goes down about 21%. So after the divorce, and for the women, it's usually about 40%. So both parties, and unfortunately, it's not proportionate. Both parties do suffer financial, but that's logical. You're sharing one house, you're splitting all the expenses, and now you're paying everything twice.
Yeah.
So inevitably, that's not going to be the same as when you were married. But the concept of being left penniless because your ex is ruthless and is going to drag you to court, etc., that won't happen unless you're doing something incredibly wrong, like hiding assets,
Right.
anything like that.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. No, I think that's a big fear for people, that they're going to be, not be able to afford to live and
Yeah,
support their kids. I mean, I know I haven't too.
yeah, and I think that's where doing a lot of budgeting. I mean, I work with a lot of my clients in building a budget to see how it all adds up and whether they can actually make ends meet every month, and thinking about what that means in terms of what kind of maintenance they need, and potentially going back to work, that kind of thing. It's really important. And then that long-term view that you can get from a financial planner to see, whether the arrangements you're signing up to allow you to sustain yourself long-term, and especially in retirement. So those are important conversations to have in terms of this is a very important moment in terms of planning your financial health and your future. So you do want to spend the time doing it, but it's not the same as finding yourself completely dissolute, without left with nothing, and the other person gets the whole lot. It's not
Right.
that binary.
No,
And the
not
other one that comes up a lot similar, but on the kid side, is this fear that they're going to take my children, right? And I think there's still very much this idea that the mother is going to get the kids just kind of automatically. And that again is not true. And I think that's partly why men are less likely to start divorce. So I think it's something like 30% only of divorces are initiated by men. I wouldn't be surprised if that was one of the factors, because they think, she's going to keep the kids and I'm going to
right.
lose my kids.
Right. Yeah. No, I know in many states, and not all, it's assumed that it's going to be 50-50 custody.
Yeah.
And so, that's what the judges would rule on unless there's addiction or some kind of child abuse or some kind of other reason not to award that. But that might not work for some people,
Yeah.
if there's different situations for different people, and if you want to have the custody plan that works for your family, the best thing to do is work that out
Yeah.
together.
Yeah, and again, I mean, I think this is another one where it's on a case by case basis, and every case is different. But you certainly can't have a generic rule where you think the mom is necessarily going to keep the kids, and as a dad, I'm going to stop seeing my kids or only have them every other weekend. That is definitely not a given.
It's
And
not good for the kids either.
no,
It's really good for the kids to have both parents have a significant role in their lives, as long as they're, not
yeah.
abusive or on drugs or something
And
like
I
that. Yeah.
think that there has been a good evolution in that respect, and recognizing that dads have just as many rights as moms, and that they can be very hands-on and very proactive. And the movement towards much more of a 50-50 split of time is linked to that, because there is a recognition and a change of roles in society as well, where women are working as well, and actually they might not want to have the kids all the time. They have professional obligations as well.
Exactly. I always tell people, and that a lot of moms specifically have trouble giving up 50% custody. I know I did. And I tell people that it really is an opportunity for you to have so much more in your life than you would ever normally have,
Yeah,
and then appreciate the time that you
that's
have with
true.
the kids. So,
Yeah, and also to rest, because it's hard being a single parent.
yeah,
So, if you have your kids 90% of the time on your own, it's a lot of work.
it
And so,
is.
as much as you love them and you want to be with them as much as possible, it's nice to have a little bit of time as well for yourself, where you don't have to cook dinner every night and you don't have to run around on school runs, etc.
Yeah. But people think that they want to do that 100% because that's what they envision or that's what they've always done. But you can get so many other things in your lives when you have a shared custody arrangement. Number one, it's good for you, it's good for the kids, and it's easier than you think once you get used to
Yeah.
it. It's just hard in the beginning. I remember at the beginning, every time my kids weren't at my house, it was like painful. But then,
Yeah.
like I said, I realized, oh, I can go do things and I
Yeah.
can, have a life and I can relax and, so
There's
there are so
definitely,
many.
once, first of all the hoopla is over and you've got those papers signed, you tend to be kind of faced with the reality of what's just happened. And it's settling into that new life for the kids and for both parents, getting used to this new dynamic. And one of the big ones is getting used to not having your children all the time. But as you said, it's an opportunity to also do things that you never had a chance to do before, to reconnect with old hobbies, with old friends. And I remember it being quite hard the first few weekends when I didn't have my kids, and trying to, create activities so that I wasn't going to be, faced with the fact that they weren't in the house. But after a few months, you kind of get into it, and actually you start to really look forward to those
Yeah.
moments. And then,
Yep.
also if you meet someone new, that changes things as well. And actually having that time where you can that you can dedicate to your new love life, and then the time you have your kids, you can dedicate to them, and you don't feel torn. They're nicely separated. That's quite a nice setup to have as well.
Yeah, I just warn people, don't rush into anything.
Absolutely,
You want to
absolutely.
have that time alone to focus on yourself
Yep,
first, and then you can
and
start
to
with
heal.
somebody else. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone has any questions. I've seen a lot of people join, but we haven't had any comments in the chat. If anyone has a question or comments or wants to share their own story, feel free to put it in there. We'll be happy to answer it. We've gone pretty much through our list. I mean, there's so many, so many myths about divorce, but I think we've covered the main ones. And I think, you know, the main message is that stay away from those kind of you know, cinema induced visions of divorce. You know, what the media show as, you know, a typical divorce isn't the reality. And so getting information early on, speaking to a coach who can talk you through the various options and help you shape your divorce that works for you based on your context, your kids, your ambitions, is really going to be really a game changer in terms of how the divorce goes down. And it's going to take away a lot of those misconceptions and avoid a lot of the mistakes that people make because they don't understand properly how it all works.
Yeah, and an attorney is not the only source for information. Get information from other sources than a divorce attorney. They can be really good to help you with the law, but the divorce is just like 10% law. You know, like
Well,
it's
it's the admin
90%
of
other
the
things.
divorce, but
Yeah,
it's a life event much more than
yeah,
an admin event, isn't it?
yeah. No, it's got there's so much that goes into it other than what the legal piece of it. So it's really important you get all that other information too.
We should have put that one on our list as well, that the first call should be to a lawyer. I
Yeah.
mean, I think that's kind of the traditional approach, and people think that that's the first call to make. But actually, before you even speak to a lawyer, you need to tell your spouse that you want a divorce. You need to speak to your kids. You need to think, you know, gather information, prepare yourself emotionally for the journey ahead. And that's not a lawyer's job. So
No.
there is that whole element that is really about making a life-changing decision. And you want to make sure that you're making it, you know, informed and supported. And again, that's not a legal matter. That's a personal matter. That's a life decision. And you need somebody who's trained to do that, not who's going to look at it purely from a legal perspective.
Exactly. Very
I don't,
important.
there hasn't been any extra comments, so I think we might wrap up.
Yeah. No, this is
Was there anything you
great.
wanted to add, Jill?
Um, just that there are answers for every question that you have, and that it's really important for you to find the right professional to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And please, please, please don't try and find those answers on Facebook groups or on
No,
Google, because you will get answers that are not fit for purpose, that might relate to another jurisdiction, to someone's very specific situation. So get it, you know, friends, family, they're all well intended, but they're not in a position to advise. Really get the suitable professional advice. Thank you
all
all
right.
very
I have a
much.
thank
All
you.
right,
Bye
take care,
bye.
Jill.